Thank you all for that session and giving us a glimpse of the work and projects that are already underway as part of the Center for Gender Analysis. We move on now to our first in-depth panel discussion. What can the state do to improve women's economic empowerment? I'd like to invite Secretary Arti Ahuja back onto the stage, please. And joining her for this discussion is Mr. Anurag Behar, someone who needs no introduction, but I will do a very short one anyway. He is the CEO of the Azim Premji Foundation and founding Vice Chancellor of the Azim Premji University. A key advocate for public education, Mr. Behar played a crucial role in developing India's national education policy and national curriculum framework, focusing on systemic educational reforms to enhance quality and accessibility in Indian education.
Thank you so much. So, Arti ji, thank you so much for being here. It's a pleasure. And, I must start with a small short story from my last week trip to Odisha. So, I was in Keonjhar and Sundargarh. These are districts that I think Arti ji is very familiar with. Arti ji is from the Odisha cadre of the IAS. So, she's very, very familiar with that. I was there in Keonjhar, Sundargarh. And there are two aspects to this last week's trip. Aspect one is that there is a very significant sort of a nutritional program that our partners are running there. Essentially, how do you get young children, small children, and mothers to have better nutritional content, right? That's the basic objective. And it sounds very simple, but how does one make sure that that actually happens in those distant villages where, let's say, tribal communities are living on top of a mountain, right? How do you make sure that the Anganwadi system delivers exactly what it is supposed to do? How do you make sure that, let's say, children who are at risk, whom you can see who are at risk, how do you escalate that and provide them the right nutrition? And I think the state of Odisha has made remarkable progress, absolutely remarkable progress on that. And the fascinating thing is, it goes back to Artiji's stint as the Principal Secretary of Women and Child Development. So she was there, this I would say is 2016, 15 to 15, 14, 15, 14, 15, yeah. So she was there and we worked with her and the Odisha team and developed this comprehensive program, and one can see this. And the fascinating thing is that when I was in those districts, the officers were still remembering her, right? That this is the kind of thing that she started and which sustains 8-9 years later, right? Now, in that same trip, I was also, and which is something that I do all the time, I was meeting a bunch of teenage girls, right? 16, 17, 18, 19-year-old girls. That's what I was. So I met like maybe 5 such sets of girls. And everywhere I meet these girls, and I do this, fortunately my job is such that one week I'm in the Sundargarhs of this country, and another week I'm here in Delhi or some place like this. So every time I meet these bunch of girls, and this is from Assam to Gujarat, from Tamil Nadu to Kashmir, I ask them one question basically. And the question is, what do you want? It's a very simple question. What do you want? And the answers are so remarkably common across the entire country. First, we want to have fun. Okay, is it surprising? So we want to have fun, and there's very deep meaning in it. So in many places, they've told me in the past 6 months, many places they've told me, please switch on Jhube Jo Pathan. Jhube Jo Pathan, the song, and then we'll dance to it. We want to have fun. Second, we want education. We want education. And, this is remarkable. I do this with boys also. But amongst boys, very often you'll hear कि पढ़ने का क्या फायदा है? ठीक है, छोड़ देते. But with girls, never in the past 10 years have I heard ever that there is one girl who does not want to go to next higher level of education. It is truly remarkable. Huh? We want to have fun, we want education, and we want jobs. Right? That's the third one. So the surge, the tidal surge that one can see on the ground, And these are really the small villages and kasbas, deep islands inside the Brahmaputra. Exactly the same answer I've got there, right? Now that's the situation. So I want to go back to a phrase that Arti ji used. She talked about the mega trends and how women participation is increasing. And then she said, the two questions to ask of ourselves is the quality and the pace. And my sense on the ground is that the aspirations of our young girls, who are the women of tomorrow, and who really are the country's future, these aspirations are soaring. So the question is, what is it that we can do to keep pace with that? So it's in that context that I'll frame our discussion. Also, I'll frame it in a certain way. While we have Arti ji here today as the Secretary Labour of Government of India, through my narration of the first story, you know how deeply experienced she is at the level of the state. And we know how much of the work and the action happens at the level of the state. Right? And also, as we were chatting just before, there are 30 states in this country, and they have differential capacities. So I would like to focus this discussion in the context of the aspirations of our girls, which are the wonderful energy for this country, and also in the context of actually the states. Not really so much about the Government of India, but with a deep knowledge, what is it that the states that should be doing, can be doing, and so on, right? So with that, maybe we can just start with this broad perspective as to what is the government's view and both takes, the Government of India's view and a state's view on what the government should be doing about better quality and higher pace of jobs for women.
Thank you. First of all, cockles of my heart are warmed and heated. Thank you for that comment and the fact that, what one does as a system prevails after one leaves is indeed the most heartening thing an administrator can hear. So thank you for that. Now coming to your discussion with the young girls, I think the sense, the energy, it comes from the fact that being the most liberating thing for a woman is being financially independent. There is nothing like that. When you asking somebody for money to run a household, for anything, and that money is handed over grudgingly, it's probably in a way degrading and humiliating. So financial independence is probably the greatest liberator of that, of all. And that's where being part of the labor force helps. And it's not just about jobs. Let's go beyond that. It's also about livelihoods. It's not necessary that one has to be in a job as we understand, but also be part of the livelihoods. So what we are seeing today is what you mentioned is, let's say, the supply side. But what about the demand side, where the whole issue of governance or government comes in? But I would say it's not just only about the government. First of all, it's in all of government, including the states, including different ministries. It's also all of society, the private sector, the social partners. And we are seeing a change everywhere. So governance, you mentioned about systems, let's say that were put in place a couple of years back in everywhere. How have those systems led to indicators we are seeing today? Let's say we take the issue of what is it that holds women back from participating actively in the labor force. And let's look at certain indicators in our country. There was a time when, maternal health was an issue. There wasn't enough legislation that said that even in the private sector, you have to give maternity leave. So those amendments have come into place. We are seeing more and more even women in the outsourced employments being given paid maternity leave. That's helping. We are seeing MMR come down. We are seeing the fertility rates come down. We are now almost at a replacement rate. This has a, it's like this, the workforce participation and fertility rates both impact each other, right? So we can see these indicators, which are proxy indicators for how women's empowerment is happening and it is growing. We also see the other issues relating to women's health, which were particular to women. For example, there was a huge incident, TB, for example, or inhaling smoke from the chulhas. We don't hear about it now. We don't hear about it because there is Ujjwala, there is, the whole issue of going out for toilets, now those drinking water at home. It's very well documented. For example, in the US, when the labor-saving devices, such as washing machines, etc., came in, women's workforce participation went up. In our country, similarly, these could be factors that are enhancing women's participation in the workforce. And this is an all-of-government approach that is leading to this. So I would say broadly, it is active interventions. There were presentations on the collateral effects of government policy. And some of these are not actively targeted at women, but they have made an impact on women, empowerment, and also their participation in the labor force. And I would cite, the example of Orissa. When I joined service there, 50% of seats were already reserved in panchayats for women. And the self-help group movement, Mission Shakti, came up, and it was a very strong movement. What happened as a consequence was that a lot of very strong women in the villages got created. And they were also used for other things. I mean, they got actively engaged in a whole lot of social reform in the villages itself. They came out, and to this date, they are a very strong force. It's happened in Kudumbashree, it's happened in Karnataka, it's happened in Andhra, the whole early days, that anti-ARIC movement by the women's self-help groups, women's groups. So gradually we are seeing that over the last few decades, this women coming together for social causes, it makes a lot of difference. And it is the next generation of those women that are now aspiring for an even faster pace of development, even a faster pace of engagement and empowerment. And I think the infrastructure or the foundation has been laid for that. And I only see the way up now.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. I think a couple of things that you're mentioning, which is that there's this comprehensive view that we need to take. For example, the health matter that you talked about, and the MMR matter that you talked about, and how that affects eventually flow into the economic empowerment matter as well, right? So I think that's in a very significant sense, that's what the Center for Gender Analysis is attempting. That normally, and policies, not just government policies, but corporate policies, which are not seemingly directed towards women, how they really have deep effects on women. So I think that's one. The other is, I think, the critical point you're making about social empowerment. So empowerment, how inextricably linked is the matter of social, political empowerment along with economic empowerment. So I think that's, so if I just stay with these things and just for a minute, request you to take off your Secretary Labor hat, right? and put on the hat of, let's say, the Chief Secretary of Odisha. And I'm deliberately picking Odisha because Odisha is we work with many states. Odisha is a very well-governed state. Certainly there's a variation. So, and other states I won't name. So I want to take two states, Odisha, which you're familiar with, and another one which is not, that you may not be familiar intimately on the ground, but you know is not as well governed, because state capacity has very significant effect. So as the Chief Secretary of those two states, what are the kind of things that you would do that can help with these matters that we're talking about in the comprehensive fashion? So eventually whatever action the government is taking or the government is encouraging businesses to take, whatever action, whether they're directly gender oriented or not, are having gender effects. So as the chief secretary of those two states and deliberately pushing you into those two different corners, what would you do?
You're definitely pushing me in a corner, let's say. So, I think the first is that one has to look at systems. It's very easy in government to do things which appear very nice on the surface, but which may not sustain. A system change is more difficult. It's tougher to do. A system change happens when you engage with different stakeholders from the grassroots up and you take into account their viewpoints. To my mind, there is nothing called a bad policy. You know, people say that policy was good, implementation was bad. A policy that does not take into account implementation constraints in itself is not a good policy. You cannot say it was a good policy, but implementation was bad. So any change that has to be made has to be systemic. I think that's the first principle when we are talking governance, irrespective of which state we are in. And I'm very proud to say that Orissa has taken some very systemic changes, which are invisible, which are not tom-tommed about, but which have, you know, the effect is cumulative. In any social sector change, the gestation period is very long. You don't see the effects in 2 years or 3 years. It takes a long time for those effects to happen. So that courage of conviction to know that today what I'm doing is not going to be apparent tomorrow, that is what is needed, I think, across, everywhere. And that is probably what has happened. I mean, just any example that you could take, you know, the paradigm shift that has happened. Look at the poverty rates coming down. And it impacts women more. Their real incomes go up, the household incomes go up. You know, these kind of things, although they are not talked about, but they are what lay the foundation for women to then free themselves from the drudgery and then look at other opportunities. So to my mind, that would be the approach to be taken.
And what about a state that's not as well governed?
I would say the same applies to them because you cannot differentiate governance. So if one is really looking at systems, spending more time on listening to others, diverse voices, spending more time on planning, and then taking up issues and convincing everybody that this is the right way to go, I think that really works, and it is shown in many places. We see the results.
And from your experience in the state, and you have handled various, a range of departments in the state, when policy making happens, how and when do women get accounted for? And that question is not so much to do with, let's say, Department of Women and Child Development, because that's directly for women. But let's say if you look at the Industries Department, and Industries Department says, look, you know, let's incentivize the development of, you know, a certain set of industries. When do women start accounting? Is that thought about, or how can it be thought about? In the nitty-gritty of this thing, you know, I mean, like you said, eventually, it's really the nitty-gritty. I mean, it is not. I mean, everybody has good intentions. All policies are good in a sense, right? But it's the nitty-gritty that counts. So, what does really happen today? And how is it that in the nitty-gritty in a state, something of this nature can be integrated?
So let me, you asked me for an example beyond women and child development. Let me give you an example of one of the most neglected segments of our society, that is women with disabilities. Do they not have a right to be part of the job market? How do they even get counted? Right? So in Orissa, I'll give you the example of Orissa. In Orissa, we actually took up a survey. And, you know, in all the villages, everywhere. And we identified women with disabilities. and also set up one-stop centers for them near their villages where they could get disability certificates, because that's the basic entitlement. Unless you have, you will not be entitled for a job or whatever. Bus passes to which they are entitled to, other things, health checkup, whatever. All those things we did. And then we framed a policy, a women's policy, Orissa we came out with, I think around 2012-13, we came out with a women's policy, which was not so much a policy as actionable points across different departments, different verticals of the government. And I'm just giving you the example of women with disability. So that went into that. But you know, small things, when you talk of nitty-gritty and when you're talking systems, the wheelchairs that are manufactured in India are manufactured keeping men in mind. Those wheelchairs are not suitable for women who need wheelchairs. Any woman needing a wheelchair, that wheelchair had to be customized. Maybe things have changed today, I'm not aware. Maybe, hopefully they have. But when I was there, the wheelchairs had to be customized for women so that they could operate them. This is the kind of detailing that one needs to do when one is making that policy. And that is when systems change. When you put that system in place, maybe it is not benefiting a large chunk of your population, but it's benefiting those to whom it matters. So just from the ground up, when you listen to those voices, then you come to know that these are the issues that I need to tackle through a policy change.
Yeah, I think that's a fascinating example. I mean, the example of the wheelchair, right? I mean, it's a truly fascinating example because that's the kind of a thing that, you know, I mean, we're investing into inclusion, and when we're investing into inclusion, are we really thinking about what kind of gendered effect it's having? I think it's a truly remarkable example. So could you tell us a little bit more about the committee on increasing labor force participation that is there? You know, what are its priorities, how it's working, what are its sort of goals, and so on?
So this is actually a task force, and it's been set up to give recommendation on how to increase women's workforce participation. We have co-opted different experts and different representatives from different organizations in it, and they've had a couple of meetings, and we hope that a preliminary report should be out soon, and then we'll also call other stakeholders for a discussion and hopefully come out with some kind of guidelines pretty soon.
Great. So I think what we'll do, and we can come back to our conversation, I can open it up for a couple of questions, if that's okay with you.
Sure.
Yeah.
Just to take forward about
Good afternoon. I'm Shashi from the Consortium of Women Entrepreneurs of India. The point which you just made about the wheelchair, that got me thinking about ergonomics, you know, and about technology also, and the tools also. So it's not just about the wheelchair, it's about how, what are the facilities you're giving for higher production. It's also for the self-employed, it's also for the people who are working in a thing. So we don't have any system at all, especially in the private sector. I mean, it's only just not the wheelchair or a ramp which goes up. That's all what we talk about. Ever thought about how women are sitting? I mean, if she has a disability, how is she going to be sitting? And how is she going to be working? And also about, like we talked about, you know, the chula and things like that. A lot of our women are working in clusters in the rural areas. It's not audible, okay. So my thing was on the ergonomics, the tools. What are the kind of tools? Because if she's not using her hands, is there a weaving mechanism for her legs? I mean, if she doesn't have some limb thing, are we being able to innovate something like that? That's not happening. And so that is where the women are not getting into the workforce. And if I can take another question, which is not now, which was earlier talked about, when you talked about disaggregate data, that was talked about. See, if you don't have data, how would you make a policy? I mean, I'm from the MSME sector. I'm promoting the micro enterprises, especially the grassroots. A lot of women after COVID, when the enterprises closed down, they got registered with the labor because they wanted to be, get those cards made so that they have the best of both. Because at that time they were not self-employed, so they went into for the employment thing. So, that was just immediate, that happened, and many of them moved from the self-employment or income-generating activities to the employment kind of thing. So they got a card, and that's why they're looking for more jobs now. So there was a lot of displacement which has not been really accounted for. So the data pre-COVID and post-COVID is a big disparity, what I would say.
Yeah, thank you for the question. And yeah, I mean, you'll have to be a bit patient, and we'll depend on Arti. Should we take a few questions, right? Yeah, I'll take. So, gentleman here, I'll come to you. So we'll do 3 questions at a time. Is that okay?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Rahul Banerjee, and I'm the Managing Director at Rising House. We are a policy think tank, and one of our focal areas include women at work. Madam has been focusing very much on how policies, have a gendered effect. For example, our transport policies, how India's transport policies, especially commercial transport, marginalize women's participation into that workforce, especially drivers. But my question to Madam Secretary would be, India's workforce participation, we see a very peculiar trend. Women's workforce participation in India is, overwhelming in marginalized sectors as well as the rural sector. And another sector that has seen a growth in women's workforce participation are the higher positions. But it has remained, continuously low in the middle sectors, especially women who are entering into the workforce, especially educated women. How exactly do you address that?
Yeah, third question there, yes.
Thank you. My name is Surendra Singh. I work as a sustainability analyst. So my question is to both of you. I mean, because both of you have been, you did comment it, and you both have been working the field. So we have talked about the system, how it kind of create more obstacles into delivering those services. My question is, any politician, because at the end of the day, this file stops with this person. If he doesn't focus on the system, he will not understand it, or she will not understand it. And if we get into this debate of that a system is stuck somewhere and it's not result driven or whatnot, my question is, any politician, this is where the policy will be executed from. They are more interested into winning the re-election. And if the system is something that they do not understand, then how would you ensure that they win the re-elections? Thank you.
I want to go first in the last question. Yeah, maybe I should go first in the last question because, I'm from outside the government, right? See, I think that there is no such one prototypical politician, right? I mean, of course, politicians want to win elections, of course. But like anything else in this country, it's a, normal curve. It's a normal curve where you'll have politicians at one edge who are not bothered about anything else at all, right? And then there are deeply committed politicians who, of course, want to win elections, but are deeply focused on what actually is happening and should be happening in the systems, right? So there's an entire range. So I don't think, and I say this with 25 years of experience working closely with state governments and with the government of India, right? So you have a range of politicians. At the average, on the average, so in that normal curve, on the average, our experience has been that actually politicians do want good work done. Because that's the way they win elections, right? They want to do good. And very often, and particularly in the states, it often comes down to state capacity, right? I mean, is their state capacity adequate or not, and those kind of things. I mean, let's say you take the example of Odisha, or you've clearly seen how Odisha has sort of diverged from the trajectories of other states which were counted there in their own cohort, right? So I am not so, not even cynical, I'm not so skeptical about politicians, you know. Yeah, so that's, but then thereafter, of course, I'll hand it over to Arti ji.
Thank you. I'd agree with you. I've been in government for 33 years now, going to retire next year. And I can tell you with certainty, there are no binaries. There are no black and whites, there are no stereotypes anywhere, either in the elected representatives or in bureaucracy or in the civil society organizations. No. There are people of all kinds. And as Anurag ji just said, that for a person, you know, it's very easy for us as bureaucrats to move on. It is the politician who has the skin in the game, you know. So if they have to win election, they have to do work. And they have to do substantive work which impacts people's lives. So their motivation for a system change, for making a difference in people's lives is much, much greater. So I mean, looking back, I would say it's a notion that has somehow crept into our system, but it's not a notion that is correct. I firmly believe that. Now, coming to the other questions about the middle income women not entering the workforce, and that's what I was referring to when I mentioned about the U-shape. So what happens is that as incomes grow, women, you know, women from when the poverty levels come down, when the household income grows, world over, the trend seen is that women who come into the middle income group, there's somehow a family thing of not letting women work. And that has been seen across the world, different levels of development. But as the household incomes rise, the education levels rise, etc., more and more middle income women enter the workforce. Right? So these are societal issues, and that's why I was mentioning about other things which make a difference, like the Panchayati Raj reservation, for example, or the self-help group movement, or the enrollment ratios for women in higher education. These are the things that lead to the rise, you know, and Anurag ji was mentioning about the aspirations of women. So these things combined are what lead to a higher workforce participation as incomes rise, or even when they are part of the middle income. And now the middle income of India is a sizable, you know, chunk of the population. I also mentioned about the drudgery saving devices that frees up women from household work. All these, you will see that the fast moving consumer goods segment is one of the fastest growing in the country. All these things make a difference to women's participation in the workforce. And coming to your issue about disaggregated data for women, and especially women entrepreneurs whose businesses shut down during COVID and who probably came into the eShram database. So as I was mentioning, for eShram is a dynamic and self-reported database. And it's not necessary that if somebody said they were an agricultural laborer in 2000, 3 years back, they are still in that occupation. So what it does give you, however, is a snapshot. And even now, every day about 16, 17,000 people register on eShram. And now we have almost 30 crore people. And those occupations keep changing. People come and change their occupation. So even the we must understand that eShram is for unorganized workers. People who are self-employed also are part of that. They could be running small businesses, They could be part of small businesses. In fact, I mentioned 400 occupations. Many of them are those which are, for example, hotel front desk manager or, sales manager, because they are also part of the small sector or self-employed. So eShram database is not necessarily those who are at the bottom of the pyramid. It also has people who earn reasonably well, right? So just wanted to make that clear, and it could include self-employed women entrepreneurs as well. We have the data, women, occupation-wise, all that. And on the issue of ergonomics, especially for women with disability, the wheelchair was an example. But there are a lot of other things, and my understanding, I moved out of that sector now, but my understanding is that a lot of water has flown under the bridge. There are a lot of changes that are happening in the ergonomics as well. As part of my job, I also deal with occupational safety and health. And we see that in a lot of industries, that is something that is being emphasized a lot, especially where one has to sit for long hours or where one is bending for long hours. The ergonomic design plays a huge role also, because for the industry it matters. It enhances their own productivity. So those things are happening.
Thank you. So we'll take one quick round of questions. Akhilaji, you had a question? Yeah. Yeah. So can I actually, sorry, can I just see the hand so that I can, I'm sorry, there's just two. Okay. If you keep it, so yeah, I'll take two. So one and one at the back, and one the lady here. And sir, if you promise to keep it like, the questions must be just 20-second questions. They should not be, okay? Yeah, please, Akhil.
So, first one was on the eShram. Many of us are, registering. So there is a conduit. It's dynamic, but it's also, mediated. So maybe those samples can be taken to understand the differentiation within, That's one suggestion. The second suggestion that I had about the systemic bias, ma'am, there is a power of veto. There is an opportunity factor, whichever sort of, administrator is, anchoring that program. There is a power of, there's an opportunity factor, but there's also a veto factor. It is in that veto that, the biases enter, not in the opportunity. So how can we, they immediately will say, no, you're not fit for this. My entitlements are clearly stated. So how do we deal with that? So.
Thanks. That is quick. Yeah, just, 20-second question, 5-10-second question.
Yeah, Ms. Ahuja, I'm curious to know what is Ministry doing to seek innovations at ground up. I run a non-profit, Sajja Sapne, and we are ensuring that young rural women from Dalit Adivasi communities have not just option of livelihood, but actually careers, long-term careers, and we're seeing early successes. So I'm curious to know how is Ministry of Labor seeking out Sajja Sapnes of the world?
Thanks. Yeah. Just very, very brief, sir, if possible.
Yeah, I'm Suresh Panje from the press. Well, I have one question addressed to Madam. In the morning, you mentioned about EPFO being one of the sources for your data compilation. How do you tackle the other women who are in the non-formal sector? EPFO is from the organized sector. What about the non-formal sector?
Thank you. Just one, like 5 seconds. Then. I'm sorry, it's my tough job.
We train youth with disabilities to put them into jobs and enterprise, resilient livelihoods, largest in this area. I was fascinated by the fact that you, so many years back, worked on intersectional issues, which I find are completely missing in even gender discourse. Okay, so we've launched an initiative recently to focus only on women with disabilities in the broader spectrum of our work. And that's, if I could take 1 second more, Anurag. During COVID, we had set up a helpline, and we found it was jammed with young girls and women with disabilities calling us saying, we also want money in the pockets, we also want to be trained, but your timings don't suit us, when we asked them what you want. And they all wanted afternoon lessons so that they could finish their housework in the morning and enroll. So we did that, Arti ji. And then McKinsey did a pro bono, dipstick study on the work which we did. The results were really mind-boggling because of the vulnerability of them. So we are launching now a full-fledged work. Could you just give me a Orissa Connect? I know it was some time back, just to look at it and to see how it's fitted into policy and to see what's happening on the ground. Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. So I'll also take 5 seconds in my answers quickly. So first on the EPFO versus the non-formal. EPFO is for the formal sector, and that's what I was mentioning, that from there we get the net payroll additions every month so that we know how many new jobs are being created in the formal sector. It's a proxy. But for the informal sector is the eShram database, which is dynamic in nature and where we come to know how many people are working in what kind of occupations. Now we have added other features to eShram, whereby we know how many people are migrating from one state to the other, including men with women and children or women on their own. So we are pushing that data to the states to take up issues that are particular to migrating families, the women and children, so that they get their entitlements there. And we are also, especially for those in the construction sector, the building and construction workers, and among those who are migrants to another state, how can we give them those facilities? So that is the eShram database and how it's being used. It's also being used to give agency to the person who gets the unique ID to ensure the portability of their entitlements. It's also being used when somebody gets their UAN, then they can choose whether they want to go for apprenticeship, they want to go for further skilling, they want to go for further training, they want to apply for a job through our own National Career Services portal, etc. So there's an organic linkage with all these portals. There's an autofill and person can just go, they don't have to fill in data again, and they can simply go and apply for a job or go for apprenticeship, etc. So that's how this eShram is being used, and the innovations from ground up, a lot of work I think is already happening on that. There are a lot of people working on ground in the NGO sector. Government is also pushing for that through the whole Skill India mission. The MSME sector has their own schemes which help women entrepreneurs. The Startup India helps women startups. They get certain additional benefits. So all that thing is happening. And innovations for women are also happening. But to my mind, the best job market is the one that is agnostic. It doesn't care if you're a man or woman. You get the job based on your own merit, right? So our innovations also need to focus on those kind of things as well. On the issue of, the last question that was asked, numerous studies across the world have found that when there are lesser hours of work, the workforce participation goes up. That's about the quality of job, but also the hours of work. And also work from home. One of the speakers had pointed out that maybe it's just a window dressing, but it's not. Work from home makes a difference in women's workforce participation. Less hours of work, the right hours of work make a difference in women's workforce participation, and that's something that numerous studies and data also tell us. So on that note, may I
Your
say thank you.
5 seconds are over.
Yes. My
Thank
time
you
is
so
up.
much. Yeah. Thank you. That's
Thank
truly
you so
wonderful, and I
much.
think it's a wonderful thing to have somebody as our Secretary Labour who has that kind of background experience that she has, and I think that makes a huge amount of difference. So thank you for doing this role in the way you do it. Thank you. Thank you.